Okay, good morning. Right. So I'm going to give a quick introduction about the course economics in traditional Chinese philosophy. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk through it, and I'll keep it brief. Is my audio working all right? Is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is a new lecture series, and in this particular lecture series, we'll explore the theories of economic management in traditional Chinese culture. Now, some of you may say that economics is a modern concept, and that's right. The discipline was first formally defined by the Scottish philosopher Adam Smith in 1776 as an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Right? He wrote a book called Wealth of Nation, and the subject itself, economics, was first called political economy in the late 19th century, and the British economist Alfred Marshall changed the name to economics, okay, as a shorter term for economic science. Now, during the last 300 years, economics has evolved into many different branches, as you know, for example, microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and so on, and later on, behavioral economics. Okay, but anyway, economics is essentially a social science that studies the production, distribution, consumption of goods and services, and it looks at the behavior and interaction of economic agents and how the economy works, basically. So the subject, like I said, it has only been in existence for 300 years. So it's a relatively young social science. However, human society and human interaction existed long before the word economics was ever invented, right? Now, if you think about the long history of the Chinese history as a civilization, and as you all are well aware, there are records dated back to over 5,000 years ago, and during this time, countries and societies arose and disappeared, and as Kelly said earlier, right, the good conducts and excellent governance were recorded and studied by the scholars and practiced by generations of kings and families and clans. But also the bad conducts were also recorded and studied by the scholars. So in traditional Chinese culture, economics is not an alien subject, but quite an ancient subject, if you like. And all of these economic theories have been extracted from thousands of years of practice and experiment, not on a computer, of course, but with real people. And as you will see in this course, whenever it happens in the future, the classics and texts not only provide us with theoretical deductions, but also stories and explanations. So in modern, scientific terminology, we can say that these traditional texts have all the meat and bones of scientific research, such as hypothesis development, data gathering, hypothesis testing, and so on. Okay, but the problem is these days economics is more about numbers, right? It's more about numbers. But the ancient Chinese recognize that economics is fundamentally a social science. I mean, you can say there was a mathematical element in there, but it's essentially a social science, which is about the people, right? Now, this is because the improvement of economic condition is ultimately based on the improvement of human nature through education. Now, I think this is really important, so let me just repeat this. It's because the improvement of economic condition is ultimately based on the improvement of human nature through education. So economics and things like ethics are not entirely separate subjects. And as you know, in traditional teaching, topics such as economics, ethics, sociology, education are one entity. And they usually do appear in the same chapter or the same book, right? So I think the advantage of of this kind of knowledge system is that it prevents the downside of the modern partition system of teaching. If you open any, if you pick any economics or finance textbooks, right, any textbook, you may find a standalone chapter on things like the return, rates of return or GDP or things like that, right? And there's no mentioning about human development, just the numbers. And you might think, well, that's okay because this chapter is just about the numbers. However, the problem with that is that the overemphasis on such things, the rate of return or GDP, can result in the deterioration of the economic indicators in the long term. And I'll give you an example towards the end of this talk. So now to show you why economics teaching is embedded in traditional culture. Let's talk a bit about the Confucian analects. I mean, is the Catherine gave an introduction about it, and is the text that everybody knows. So we're not going to go through any quote, but let's say this book has 20 chapters, right? 20 chapters on the topics such as ethical conducts, rights and music, right? Managing state affairs, discussion of the past kings and their mistakes, personal conduct and appearance, and also views about the people that Confucius met during his traveling, and so on. Okay. Now, there is not a single word about economics in Confucian analects. So we might mistakenly think that, oh, Confucius doesn't he has never talked about economics. He doesn't know. However, Zhao Pu, the chancellor of the first chancellor who helped Emperor Taizu to establish the Song dynasty, right? He said that I helped the first emperor to win the world, if you like, with half of the analects. I don't know which half, right? But basically 50% of it. And I used the other half to help the second emperor, Emperor Taizong of Song, to govern the world. So the first 50% is to help to win the world and use the other half to manage it. Now, if you think about managing a country or managing the world, the governance of a country or the world is essentially the management of economic life. I mean, there are many other things, but if you look at the news these days, it's all about economics. It's all about, living standard and things like that. So a big chunk of it, a big chunk of governance is indeed the management of economic life. So we can never deny the power, right, of economic teaching that is embedded in these traditional texts. It has to be there. Now, as I said earlier, the writing style of traditional text is different from modern textbooks, right? So, in order to help the modern learners and policymakers to make the most out of these valuable teachings, what I do is to extract relevant content from them and rearrange according to the general frame of modern economics teaching. Okay, so in other words, the teaching materials are not classic oriented, but content oriented. So this is the plan for this lecture series in the future, and we will investigate traditional topics such as consumption, production, distribution, all right, to mirror the modern knowledge system. Now, another thing about this is the delivery of this course. The delivery is oriented by practice, it's driven by practice and use. Okay, and I think we should always keep in mind how we can incorporate the traditional teaching into modern policy making. I mean, if you think about it, Zhao Pu, he successfully used the analects to assist the building or the founding of the Song Empire. I'm sure he used other classics, of course, but let's use build the argument based on his quote, right? He successfully used the analects to assist the founding of the Song dynasty, but it was already 1400 years after the analects was compiled, right? It wasn't written the day before. It was 1400 years ago from his time. Now, another 1,000 years passed since Zhao Po, but we modern humans still worry about the same economic problems as our ancestors did. Nothing has ever changed. So it is very valuable to my opinion. Okay. Now, before we move on to the fundamental theories of Confucius, I want to clarify which component of traditional Chinese philosophy that this particular course is related to. And as you all are, all aware, the traditional Chinese culture is a combination of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. So I want to make it crystal clear from the beginning that the three branches are never ever to be treated as entirely different religions, right? And I remember the Venerable Master Qin Gong has mentioned on numerous occasions that the three teachings are only different in the form, but the idea and the content are already fused together. All right. For example, the Taoist masters read the Buddhist sutras and the Confucian and Mencius classics, and the Confucians also read the Buddhist sutra and the Taoist classics. Okay, so they are they are from one single entity, but because of this time limit, right? I think is if this course does, I mean, realistically in the university you have 5-6 weeks for each course. So because of the time limit, in terms of the classics and the text, I intentionally select most of the materials from Confucian classics, not because the other two are not important. Now, the reason is that we want to make direct reference to the ancient political and economic teaching. So it is suitable for our purpose to design our teaching material with some constraints. Okay, so this is the basic structure of this lecture series. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a time to talk about the fundamental concept and philosophy of Confucius and try to see how they are related to economic development. Okay, so I'll try to keep it brief. Now, the way that we can, categorize Confucius teaching is numerous, right? There are many dimensions through which we can do this, but what we can do is to divide the classics into two. I'm sorry, the concept into the two classes of concept. One is called the law of variety, and the other is called the law of unity, Okay, so the law of variety refers to things that are changeable with the need at different times, right? With the need at the time. But the law of unity refers to what doesn't change, what is independent of time, and that is human nature. Okay. Now, within the law of variety, we have what is called the three stages. Whereas the nature of man, which is what doesn't change, we have the principle of love and principle of reciprocity. Okay, I'll give more details in a minute. Now let's have a look at the three stages, right? The law of variety. Now, what are they? Well, the three stages simply refer to the general concept of social evolution. It's basically a rough classification of social status in a time series fashion. Okay, like I said, it changes through time. Now, in the Book of Rights, which is one of the 5 classics, is actually one of the 6 classics, but the Book of Music has been lost. So, and it's also called, I guess, the Book of Rituals or Ceremony. But anyway, okay, in the Book of Rights, the chapter of the evolution of civilization, Confucius describes that the human society starts off from what is called the disorderly stage. And then it moves on to what is called the advancing peace stage. Okay, and there's another name for it, it's called the Small Tranquility. Before reaching the extreme peace stage, the final extreme peace stage. Okay, so just remember this disorderly stage, advancing peace stage in the middle, and then extreme peace stage. So 3 different stages. Now, we're not going to look at the text itself, but if you notice, if you care to look, if you notice that in this stage of advancing peace stage, which is the middle one, right? The middle one. Confucius mentions a number of different relations. They are the relations between rulers and subordinates. And in today's language, I guess, it also equivalent to the relationship between managers and employees, for example. Okay. Also, the relationship between parents and children, between siblings, between husband and wife, and between friends as well. Okay, so 5 human relations. Also, Confucius mentions 5 moral constants in the passage, which are benevolence, righteousness, rights or ritual, or, rules of propriety, and wisdom and sincerity. Okay. Now, the question is, why are the above relations or moral constant only mentioned in the advancing peace stage, but not in the extreme peace stage? I mean, if you look at the text, all of these relations are only mentioned in the middle stage, which is the advancing peace stage or small tranquility, but not in the final stage, not in the extreme peace stage. Why is that? Well, I think the reason is that people only, in the extreme peace stage, which is the final stage, people only have love and are selfless. This is the highest level of human development. Not necessarily materially, but at least mentally. Okay. And people from all classes and groups, social groups, know about helping others and serving others. So this is the definition of extreme peace. Therefore, there is no need to mention anything about the correct human relation or morality, because people would have returned to their innate goodness and inner nature. But in the advancing peace state, the one in the middle, people think of themselves. I mean, they do think of others, but they also think of themselves. So there is a need to, remind people about the proper human relation and morality. There's a need for it. Now, I think this concept of, evolution of society has practical implications for policymaking. If you look at the history of economic and financial market development, we may find that policymaking is time variant as well. It changes through time. For example, in the opening of China in 1978, all right, the Chinese, it marked a new era of economic development. The government implemented a new economic system in 1978 or 79, around that time, turning from complete central planning to a mix of central intervention and a market-based economy. And the government's goal changed from what is called the class struggle to what is called the total economic development, as we know today, right? And well, the rationale is very simple. The country was poor at the time. And, so there's this total shift in government objectives echoed the voice of the people. People need a better material life. So the basic necessities must be made sufficient to the people. And so the country must completely revamp its economic system. And so these changes were put in place by basically putting material needs as the priority. Okay, so since then, the government made countless reforms from agriculture, rights and property of farmers, the banking system, price setting mechanisms, and taxation system and whatnot. So for the first time, private enterprises were no longer under the administration of the state, and foreign companies were allowed to make direct investment in China, okay, from 1978 or 9. Now, after several decades of economic development, wealth has multiplied to a level that was unimaginable 40 years ago. But the struggle, okay, the struggle is not always there, just different forms. The struggle is no longer the fight to survive, but the need for mental richness. Okay, making money is always important. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's always important. It will always be important. But, well, at least for ordinary people. Okay, but the government begins to focus more on the harmony development of the society and human relation by learning from the traditional culture. So this is simply an evolution of the society. And it is very closely related to the principle of the 3 stages by Confucius that we mentioned earlier, right? And also, the society doesn't necessarily progress in a linear fashion, right? So sometimes you go from disorderly stage to, advancing peace stage, and then to extreme peace stage. But then you may go back to chaos because of both external and internal factors. And I think we can all witness what is happening today, right? What is hidden behind this seemingly prosperous economic and technological advancement is the ever-growing inequality, divided society, financial market disruption with increasing destructive power and frequency. And on the top of those, we've got the loss of filial piety between children and family, diminishing, harmony between husband and wife, between siblings, friends. I think only a blind person would say there is no such a problem, right? But this is where the traditional Chinese philosophy can offer solutions. I think it's fair to say that all the Confucian teachings, I mentioned Confucius a lot because, like I said, this course focuses on Confucian classics because of the, physical constraint of the teaching time. So all the Confucian teachings aim to direct people towards their original inner goodness, right? I mean, if you examine the governance of the sage rulers in the history of mankind, you may find that in making economic policies, they all consider the consequential impact on human nature development. So it's not just the numbers, right? Not just the numbers. And in economics, there's actually a word for it. It's called externality. Externality, and that it refers to the cost and benefit that affects the party who didn't choose to incur that cost or benefit. So things like pollution or the systematic risk brought by the banking system's risk taking. They're just some of the examples, okay, of negative externality. But the true externality is much broader than these quantifiable factors. For example, a overemphasis on free competition leads to a focus on quantitative economic indicators. And this will lead to a diminishing importance of the qualitative indicators, such as morality. Well, at least there's very little mentioning of these moral factors in any of the mainstream economic or financial research. Okay, people don't talk about it. But people talk about morality in a separate module called, perhaps corporate governance or things like that. But then that is a separate subject. They are never mentioned together with the mainstream economic teaching. And I think that is wrong. So that's the social evolution. Now, but human nature doesn't change, right? So what we just said is the law of variety, the change of the society. But human nature, however, doesn't change, and that is the law of unity. Okay. The law of unity is basically based on the inner nature of man, and that nature is love, the principle of love. So what is it? What is love? Well, that's going to take a day to explain it, but let's look at what Venerable Master Chin Kung said about love, which I think is the most concise. He explained the concept of love in a lot of details. He said that when we look outwards, right, when we look at other people, we love others, but it's not love in a narrow sense, loving your own kind or loving love between different genders. It's not just about that. The true love means that we respect all living beings. All living beings. This is where you look outwards. But when you look inwards, when you look at ourselves, we love ourselves. But that's not selfish love, right? True love is not selfish. It is the respect that we pay to our inner nature, and that is not equivalent to selfish. So how do we love then? Well, how do we do that? If we formally define the method to practice the principle of love, then it is the principle of reciprocity. The principle of reciprocity. In Analects, there is a short passage between Duke Ling of Wei and Zigong and Confucius about reciprocity. And Confucius defined reciprocity like this. He said, what you do not want done to yourself, do not do it to others. Well, that's very simple, right? And you might think, well, that's a simple idea. Even a child knows it. But I think that's exactly the point, isn't it? Because most of the time, adults who rule the world forget the basics. Now, when we consider Confucius' theory, we think of the word benevolence, and as you will see in the course, not today, but in the actual course, the Chinese characters. In Chinese characters, the word benevolence is a picture of two people, right? Two people, not one, but two. So, and that's right, because society is formed by gathering people, and society is the foundation of human survival as well. Xunzi has a lot to say about this as well. Now, the benevolence and reciprocity are therefore the natural law that hold society together. So these concepts, reciprocity, benevolence, they're not made up concepts. They're the natural law that holds society together, right? None of it is arbitrary or man-made. It's just part of the nature. Now you may wonder, all right, what does it have to do with economics, right? Why is reciprocity important to economic development? Well, I don't know the age groups of our audience today, but you will see when if you ask your parents or your friend, about 15 years ago, we experienced one of the most devastating global financial crises since the Great Depression of 1929. I certainly didn't experience 1929. I hope you realize that. So the crisis led to a countless corporate bankruptcy. Countless people lost their lifetime savings, and many people committed suicide. I was sitting across Lehman Brothers building, and during the day, when it went bankrupt, basically, and witnessing my colleagues in the industry leaving the building. Now, according to my experience as a former banker and researcher later on, many people blame the failure of the risk model, as the cause of the crisis. And experts have, pointed out that, the models used unrealistic assumptions about correlation between volatility and things like that. And they also shown that the unsustainable business model in the housing market. So, pretty much mathematics, math-based solution. Okay. Well, so what do we do then? What do we do? What is our solution to this? Well, we can probably change the business model, right? We can restrict all of the off-balance sheet financing of big banks. We could even ban the creation of all the demonized mortgage-backed securities. We can reverse, in the case of the UK, we can reverse Gordon Brown's light touch approach. And actually we did, and scrutinize every single trade, perhaps. Or, better yet, we can go back to the early 20th century and shut down the global financial market altogether. We can do that. Now, some of you may say, well, that's, these are crazy ideas. No. These are crazy. But the even crazier idea, okay, is that very few people have realized that the cause of the problem is the complete overlook of the principle of reciprocity. Now, take securitization as an example. The derivatives, they are good invention. They're not bad, right? They're good invention. They're neutral, basically. They provide liquidity to banks. They give extra source of fixed income investment opportunity to ordinary people like you and I. So it's supposed to be a win-win situation. But the consideration of reciprocity was lost somewhere along the line, and greediness took over. The once friendly product eventually became toxic. I mean, I guarantee you, if you ask any traders, all right, go back in history and you ask any traders, can you value these products? Do you understand them? And there's a more important question. Would you put your own saving, with your own lifetime saving into these products? Would you do that? The answer is no, absolutely not. Well, then how can people sell them to pensioners and the old people if you don't want to put your own money into it, right? So the answer, I think, is very clear now. We don't stand in the shoes of others when we design financial policies or economic policies. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. We bound to make mistakes, right? We're not asking for a perfect society. No economic model is perfect, and nobody can foresee the potential, all the potential risks. But that's not the issue. That's not the problem. You see, the extreme P stage mentioned by Confucius does not exclude the possibility of a rainy day or the outbreak of a pandemic, right? It doesn't exclude any of those problems. But the use of the principle of reciprocity and benevolence in our daily job is completely under our control. This is what we can do. So to sum up, this course is, is not looking to solve all the problems, but simply to give an alternative way to think about economics and about making money. Okay, a different way of thinking about it. And I think the policymakers, the modern policymakers, should really take the ancient teachings seriously, because great honor should come with great responsibility. And I cannot emphasize this more. We don't expect all the economic agents, which are ordinary people like you and I, to understand the principle of love and reciprocity in their daily economic decision makings. They don't need, I mean, they should, but they don't need to do it perfectly. But policymakers must do, or at least the best they can. Policymakers. And apart from the technicalities and mathematical simulations and things like that, the policymakers must consider the aspect of human nature. So, as we'll see in this traditional Chinese classics, much of the content is also centered around the discussion between the sages and the emperors, or the kings. This is because the kings and emperors had much to learn from these sages, right? As Kelly earlier pointed out, and I think this is the same for our modern policymakers. And that's it. This is my introduction about the cause. Any question, you can torture me later. Thank you.